In a quiet suburb of Seattle, 62-year-old retired pharmacist Eleanor Wright was about to uncover a plot that would shake her family to its core. What began as unexplained illness symptoms after Sunday dinners became a terrifying realization when she noticed her daughter-in-law's strange behavior around her food. No one suspected that Eleanor's medical knowledge would become her greatest weapon in a fight for her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. For 35 years, Eleanor had built a reputation as one of the most respected pharmacists in the Pacific Northwest. Her encyclopedic knowledge of drug interactions had saved countless lives during her tenure at Westlake Memorial Hospital. When she retired 2 years ago following her husband Richard's death, she expected a peaceful life surrounded by family and her beloved garden. Instead, she found herself growing increasingly ill after meals at her son James's home, where her daughter-in-law Vanessa prepared elaborate Sunday dinners for the family. The first time Eleanor noticed something was wrong, she dismissed it as aging. The second time, she wondered if she had developed a food allergy. By the third episode, the pharmacist in her began connecting dots that pointed to something far more sinister. "Mom, you look exhausted. Are you sleeping okay?" James asked one evening as he helped Eleanor into her coat after dinner. "I'm fine, just a little stomach upset again," Eleanor replied, noticing how Vanessa hovered nearby, her expression a mixture of concern and something else Eleanor couldn't quite identify. "Maybe you should see Dr. Patel," James suggested. "These episodes seem to be happening more frequently." Eleanor nodded, but her mind was already cataloging her symptoms: racing heart, slight tremor in her hands, mild nausea, elevated temperature. These weren't random ailments, they followed a pattern she recognized from her years of pharmaceutical training. Before we continue, if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something even more shocking for you. Now, back to Eleanor's disturbing discovery. The spring light filtered through Eleanor's kitchen window as she spread her journal across the marble countertop. For 3 months, she had been documenting her symptoms, precisely noting their onset, duration, and intensity. The pattern was undeniable: each episode occurred within hours after eating at James and Vanessa's home. As a pharmacist, Eleanor had spent decades identifying adverse drug reactions, and these symptoms pointed to something specific. "It can't be," she whispered to herself, reviewing her notes again. The tremors, elevated heart rate, mild confusion, and nausea all aligned with low-dose atropine poisoning, subtle enough to appear as general illness in an elderly woman, but potentially lethal with increased dosage or frequency. Eleanor closed her journal, her hands steady despite the terrifying conclusion she'd reached. At 62, she prided herself on being logical and evidence-based. She needed proof before making such a serious accusation, especially one involving her son's wife of 5 years. The thought of Vanessa deliberately poisoning her seemed impossible on the surface. A successful interior designer with an apparently perfect marriage to James, Vanessa had always been polite, if somewhat distant. But Eleanor couldn't ignore the subtle changes in Vanessa's behavior over the past year, the increasing interest in Eleanor's financial matters, the casual questions about her will and estate planning, the slight irritation whenever Eleanor mentioned her plans to travel using her retirement savings. "You're jumping to conclusions," Eleanor told herself, but the pharmacist in her couldn't dismiss the evidence. If someone was introducing atropine into her food, the most likely culprit was the person preparing it. Eleanor picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Marcus? It's Eleanor Wright. I need your help with something discreet." Marcus Chen had been Eleanor's colleague at the hospital laboratory for 20 years before his own retirement. His expertise in toxicology screening had made him the go-to person for complex poisoning cases. "Eleanor. Wonderful to hear your voice. What can I do for you?" Eleanor hesitated, suddenly aware of how paranoid she might sound. "This is going to seem strange, but I need to test some food samples privately. No official records." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. "Are we talking about what I think we're talking about?" "I hope I'm wrong, Marcus. I really do. Come by tomorrow morning. Use the back entrance to my home lab. And Eleanor? Be careful." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The moonlight cast shadows across her bedroom as she considered her options. If her suspicions were correct, she was in genuine danger. But she needed evidence, irrefutable proof that would stand up to scrutiny. Eleanor got up and walked to her home office, where she kept a small safe hidden behind a landscape painting Richard had given her on their 30th anniversary. Inside was a collection of items she rarely accessed: her husband's watch, their marriage certificate, and a small black device Marcus had given her years ago when she consulted on a domestic poisoning case. The voice recorder was smaller than A credit card but could run continuously for 72 hours. She had never imagined using it in her own home, against her own family. The thought made her stomach clench, but the alternative, doing nothing while someone potentially poisoned her, was unthinkable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Richard, what would you do?" she whispered to the empty room, imagining her pragmatic husband's response. After 40 years of marriage, she could almost hear his voice. "Protect yourself first, Ellie. Then get the facts." The next morning, Eleanor arrived at Marcus's house with a sealed container holding leftover dessert from Sunday's dinner, a slice of berry tart Vanessa had specifically served to her, insisting it was a special recipe she'd made just for Eleanor. Marcus's home laboratory was modest but well-equipped. After retiring, he had maintained his licenses to conduct private toxicology work for several attorneys in the area. "This stays between us," Marcus said, accepting the container. "I'll run a comprehensive panel, looking for any substance that could cause your symptoms. Focus on anticholinergics," Eleanor suggested. "Particularly atropine or scopolamine." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's a specific suspicion. The symptoms match, and those compounds aren't typically screened for in standard blood work. They'd be dismissed as age-related issues or anxiety in someone my age." "Smart," Marcus nodded grimly. "Give me 48 hours. Those 2 days were the longest of Eleanor's life. She avoided calls from James, claiming she had a migraine and needed rest. In reality, she was preparing. If the tests came back positive, she couldn't confront Vanessa directly, it would be too dangerous. She needed a strategy that would protect both herself and her son. When Marcus finally called, his voice was tight with controlled anger. "You were right, Eleanor. The sample contained approximately 2 milligrams of atropine, not enough to be immediately life-threatening to a healthy person, but enough to cause all your symptoms. Combined with your heart condition, repeated exposure could eventually trigger cardiac arrest that would likely be attributed to natural causes." Eleanor closed her eyes, absorbing the confirmation of her worst fears. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the implications settled in her mind. "There's more," Marcus continued. "The compound appears to be pharmaceutical grade, not extracted from plants. Someone with access to medical supplies or knowledge of how to obtain them." "Thank you, Marcus. I know what I need to do now." "Eleanor, you need to go to the police." "Not yet. I need more evidence, something that proves intent and identifies exactly who's doing this. Otherwise, it's just a strange substance in a dessert. It could be dismissed as contamination or an accident." After hanging up, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, her trained mind methodically working through her options. As a pharmacist, she understood better than most how poisons worked. She also knew how to protect herself. Eleanor opened her laptop and ordered a specific set of items for overnight delivery: activated charcoal capsules, a broader spectrum voice-activated recorder, and a small camera disguised as a brooch, something Vanessa, with her eye for fashion, would notice and comment on, but wouldn't recognize as surveillance equipment. Next, she called her doctor and requested specific blood tests, explaining that she wanted a baseline for some new supplements she was considering. The tests would establish a record of her current health, creating documentation that would support her case if necessary. The final call was the hardest. She dialed her son's number, her heart heavy with the knowledge that his life was about to change forever. "James? It's Mom. I'm feeling much better now. In fact, I'd love to host dinner this Sunday instead of coming to your place. Tell Vanessa not to worry about cooking, I want to try some new recipes I've been saving." James sounded pleased by the suggestion. "That's a great idea, Mom. Are you sure you're up for hosting?" "Absolutely. It'll be fun to use my dining room again. Vanessa might want to bring dessert, you know how she is about her baking." Eleanor's grip tightened. On the phone. "Perfect. I'd love that. Tell her to bring whatever she'd like." Suburb of Seattle, 62-year-old retired pharmacist Eleanor Wright was about to uncover a plot that would shake her family to its core. What began as unexplained illness symptoms after Sunday dinners became a terrifying realization when she noticed her daughter-in-law's strange behavior around her food. No one suspected that Eleanor's medical knowledge would become her greatest weapon in a fight for her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. For 35 years, Eleanor had built a reputation as one of the most respected pharmacists in the Pacific Northwest. Her encyclopedic knowledge of drug interactions had saved countless lives during her tenure at Westlake Memorial Hospital. When she retired 2 years ago following her husband Richard's death, she expected a peaceful life surrounded by family and her beloved garden. Instead, she found herself growing increasingly ill after meals at her son James's home, where her daughter-in-law Vanessa prepared elaborate Sunday dinners for the family. The first time Eleanor noticed something was wrong, she dismissed it as aging. The second time, she wondered if she had developed a food allergy. By the third episode, the pharmacist in her began connecting dots that pointed to something far more sinister. "Mom, you look exhausted. Are you sleeping okay?" James asked one evening as he helped Eleanor into her coat after dinner. "I'm fine, just a little stomach upset again," Eleanor replied, noticing how Vanessa hovered nearby, her expression a mixture of concern and something else Eleanor couldn't quite identify. "Maybe you should see Dr. Patel," James suggested. "These episodes seem to be happening more frequently." Eleanor nodded, but her mind was already cataloging her symptoms: racing heart, slight tremor in her hands, mild nausea, elevated temperature. These weren't random ailments, they followed a pattern she recognized from her years of pharmaceutical training. Before we continue, if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something even more shocking for you. Now, back to Eleanor's disturbing discovery. The spring light filtered through Eleanor's kitchen window as she spread her journal across the marble countertop. For 3 months, she had been documenting her symptoms, precisely noting their onset, duration, and intensity. The pattern was undeniable: each episode occurred within hours after eating at James and Vanessa's home. As a pharmacist, Eleanor had spent decades identifying adverse drug reactions, and these symptoms pointed to something specific. "It can't be," she whispered to herself, reviewing her notes again. The tremors, elevated heart rate, mild confusion, and nausea all aligned with low-dose atropine poisoning, subtle enough to appear as general illness in an elderly woman, but potentially lethal with increased dosage or frequency. Eleanor closed her journal, her hands steady despite the terrifying conclusion she'd reached. At 62, she prided herself on being logical and evidence-based. She needed proof before making such a serious accusation, especially one involving her son's wife of 5 years. The thought of Vanessa deliberately poisoning her seemed impossible on the surface. A successful interior designer with an apparently perfect marriage to James, Vanessa had always been polite, if somewhat distant. But Eleanor couldn't ignore the subtle changes in Vanessa's behavior over the past year, the increasing interest in Eleanor's financial matters, the casual questions about her will and estate planning, the slight irritation whenever Eleanor mentioned her plans to travel using her retirement savings. "You're jumping to conclusions," Eleanor told herself, but the pharmacist in her couldn't dismiss the evidence. If someone was introducing atropine into her food, the most likely culprit was the person preparing it. Eleanor picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Marcus? It's Eleanor Wright. I need your help with something discreet." Marcus Chen had been Eleanor's colleague at the hospital laboratory for 20 years before his own retirement. His expertise in toxicology screening had made him the go-to person for complex poisoning cases. "Eleanor. Wonderful to hear your voice. What can I do for you?" Eleanor hesitated, suddenly aware of how paranoid she might sound. "This is going to seem strange, but I need to test some food samples privately. No official records." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. "Are we talking about what I think we're talking about?" "I hope I'm wrong, Marcus. I really do. Come by tomorrow morning. Use the back entrance to my home lab. And Eleanor? Be careful." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The moonlight cast shadows across her bedroom as she considered her options. If her suspicions were correct, she was in genuine danger. But she needed evidence, irrefutable proof that would stand up to scrutiny. Eleanor got up and walked to her home office, where she kept a small safe hidden behind a landscape painting Richard had given her on their 30th anniversary. Inside was a collection of items she rarely accessed: her husband's watch, their marriage certificate, and a small black device Marcus had given her years ago when she consulted on a domestic poisoning case. The voice recorder was smaller than a credit card but could run continuously for 72 hours. She had never imagined using it in her own home, against her own family. The thought made her stomach clench, but the alternative, doing nothing while someone potentially poisoned her, was unthinkable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Richard, what would you do?" she whispered to the empty room, imagining her pragmatic husband's response. After 40 years of marriage, she could almost hear his voice: "Protect yourself first, Ellie. Then get the facts." The next morning, Eleanor arrived at Marcus's house with a sealed container holding leftover dessert from Sunday's dinner, a slice of berry tart Vanessa had specifically served to her, insisting it was a special recipe she'd made just for Eleanor. Marcus's home laboratory was modest but well-equipped. After retiring, he had maintained his licenses to conduct private toxicology work for several attorneys in the area. "This stays between us," Marcus said, accepting the container. "I'll run a comprehensive panel, looking for any substance that could cause your symptoms. Focus on anticholinergics," Eleanor suggested. "Particularly atropine or scopolamine." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's a specific suspicion. The symptoms match, and those compounds aren't typically screened for in standard blood work. They'd be dismissed as age-related issues or anxiety in someone my age." "Smart," Marcus nodded grimly. "Give me 48 hours." Those 2 days were the longest of Eleanor's life. She avoided calls from James, claiming she had a migraine and needed rest. In reality, she was preparing. If the tests came back positive, she couldn't confront Vanessa directly, it would be too dangerous. She needed a strategy that would protect both herself and her son. When Marcus finally called, his voice was tight with controlled anger. "You were right, Eleanor. The sample contained approximately 2 milligrams of atropine, not enough to be immediately life-threatening to a healthy person, but enough to cause all your symptoms. Combined with your heart condition, repeated exposure could eventually trigger cardiac arrest that would likely be attributed to natural causes." Eleanor closed her eyes, absorbing the confirmation of her worst fears. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the implications settled in her mind. "There's more," Marcus continued. "The compound appears to be pharmaceutical grade, not extracted from plants. Someone with access to medical supplies or knowledge of how to obtain them." "Thank you, Marcus. I know what I need to do now." "Eleanor, you need to go to the police." "Not yet. I need more evidence, something that proves intent and identifies exactly who's doing this. Otherwise, it's just a strange substance in a dessert. It could be dismissed as contamination or an accident." After hanging up, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, her trained mind methodically working through her options. As a pharmacist, she understood better than most how poisons worked. She also knew how to protect herself. Eleanor opened her laptop and ordered a specific set of items for overnight delivery: activated charcoal capsules, a broader spectrum voice-activated recorder, and a small camera disguised as a brooch, something Vanessa, with her eye for fashion, would notice and comment on, but wouldn't recognize as surveillance equipment. Next, she called her doctor and requested specific blood tests, explaining that she wanted a baseline for some new supplements she was considering. The tests would establish a record of her current health, creating documentation that would support her case if necessary. The final call was the hardest. She dialed her son's number, her heart heavy with the knowledge that his life was about to change forever. "James? It's Mom. I'm feeling much better now. In fact, I'd love to host dinner this Sunday instead of coming to your place. Tell Vanessa not to worry about cooking, I want to try some new recipes I've been saving." James sounded pleased by the suggestion. "That's a great idea, Mom. Are you sure you're up for hosting?" "Absolutely. It'll be fun to use my dining room again. Vanessa might want to bring dessert, you know how she is about her baking." Eleanor's grip tightened. On the phone. "Perfect. I'd love that. Tell her to bring whatever she'd like." After hanging up, Eleanor moved through her house with new purpose. She placed voice-activated recorders in strategic locations: her kitchen, dining room, and purse. She prepared a special container for any food Vanessa might bring, ensuring she could secure samples without raising suspicion. Most importantly, she began taking daily activated charcoal supplements, which would bind to any poison and reduce its absorption, not enough to eliminate symptoms entirely, which might alert Vanessa, but enough to protect Eleanor from serious harm. As Sunday approached, Eleanor felt a strange calm settle over her. The pharmacist in her had always been methodical, detail-oriented, and prepared for emergencies. Now those same skills were helping her set a trap for someone who apparently wanted her dead. The morning of the dinner, Eleanor prepared a simple meal of roast chicken, vegetables, and rice, foods that would be difficult to tamper with without detection. She set her dining table with careful precision, selecting the floral china Richard had given her for their 25th anniversary. At precisely 5 p.m., the doorbell rang. Eleanor checked that her brooch camera was recording and opened the door to find James and Vanessa on her doorstep. Her son embraced her warmly while Vanessa stood slightly apart, holding a covered cake. "Stunt. Something smells wonderful," James said, stepping into the house. "I brought my special lemon tart," Vanessa added, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I made it with those Meyer lemons from the farmer's market, your favorite, Eleanor." "How thoughtful," Eleanor replied, accepting the cake stand. "I'll put this in the kitchen for now." As she turned away, she caught Vanessa's expression in The hallway mirror, a flash of something calculating that disappeared so quickly Eleanor might have missed it if she hadn't been watching for it. Dinner proceeded with forced normalcy. James talked about his work at the architectural firm, Vanessa described a difficult client, and Eleanor shared stories about her garden club. Throughout the meal, Eleanor noticed Vanessa watching her carefully whenever she took a drink or ate from her plate. "Who's ready for dessert?" Eleanor asked when they had finished the main course. "Vanessa, your lemon tart looks beautiful." In the kitchen, with James and Vanessa still seated in the dining room, Eleanor quickly took samples from the tart, securing them in sealed containers she had prepared. She then cut 3 slices, placing them on dessert plates. "Let me help you." Vanessa appeared suddenly in the kitchen doorway, startling Eleanor. "I've got it, dear," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice steady. "But you could grab the coffee." From the counter, Vanessa moved to the coffee carafe, but her eyes followed Eleanor's hands as she arranged the dessert plates. "Which piece is mine?" Vanessa asked casually. "They're all the same," Eleanor answered, noting how Vanessa subtly positioned herself to see which plate went where as they returned to the dining room. As they ate dessert, Eleanor pretended to enjoy her piece while actually taking minimal bites. Within 20 minutes, she began to display mild symptoms, enough to be noticeable but not alarming. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "Mom, are you okay?" James asked, concern evident in his voice. "Just a bit tired," Eleanor said, pressing her hand to her forehead. "I might have overdone it with all the cooking." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly, tracking Eleanor's movements with unsettling intensity. "Maybe you should lie down, Eleanor. These episodes seem to be happening more frequently. Have you mentioned them to your doctor?" The false concern in her daughter-in-law's voice made Eleanor's skin crawl, but she maintained her composure. "You're probably right. Would you mind clearing the dishes while I rest for a moment?" In her bedroom, Eleanor quickly took additional activated charcoal and documented her symptoms in her journal. The recorder in her brooch continued to capture everything. Through her partially open door, she could hear James and Vanessa talking in the kitchen. "I'm worried about her," James was saying. "These spells keep happening." "It's her age," Vanessa replied, her voice different than the solicitous tone she used around Eleanor. "We might need to consider assisted living options soon. She can't manage on her own anymore. She's only 62, and she's always been completely independent. People decline quickly sometimes. Remember how my grandmother was? Fine 1 month. Completely dependent the next." Eleanor's jaw tightened as she listened. The conversation confirmed what she had suspected. Vanessa was laying groundwork, creating a narrative of Eleanor's supposed decline that would make any future health emergency seem like the natural progression of aging rather than deliberate poisoning. Returning to the dining room, Eleanor made a show of moving unsteadily. "I'm so sorry about this. I don't know what's come over me." "Let me drive you to the emergency room," James suggested, standing immediately. "No, no," Eleanor protested. "It's just like the other times. It will pass in a few hours." "Other times?" James looked confused. "Has this been happening regularly?" Before Eleanor could answer, Vanessa interjected. "She's had these episodes several times after our Sunday dinners. I mentioned she should see Dr. Patel, but you know how stubborn your mother can be." The subtle manipulation in Vanessa's statement was masterful, shifting potential suspicion away from herself while characterizing Eleanor as unreasonable about her own health. "I have an appointment next week," Eleanor lied smoothly. "For now, I just need to rest. Why don't you two head home? I'll call you in the morning." After reluctant goodbyes and extracting a promise from Eleanor to call if she felt worse, James and Vanessa finally left. Eleanor waited until their car pulled away before moving with purpose through her house, collecting her recording devices and securing the food samples. She downloaded the recordings to her computer, her hand steady. Despite the residual effects of whatever Vanessa had put in the tart, the video from her brooch camera clearly showed Vanessa watching her eat with unusual intensity, and the audio captured the damning kitchen conversation. Eleanor picked up her phone and dialed Marcus. "I have more samples and evidence," she said, without preamble. "And I need your help with one more thing." The next morning, feeling much improved after a night's rest and continued activated charcoal, Eleanor called Detective Sarah Gwynn, an officer she had worked with on pharmaceutical theft cases before her retirement. "Detective Gwynn? It's Eleanor Wright. I need to report an attempted murder. Mine." 3 hours later, Eleanor sat in an interview room at the Seattle Police Department, surrounded by her evidence, food samples, toxicology results from Marcus's tests, her medical records, symptom journal, and the recordings. Detective Gwynn and her partner listened without interruption as Eleanor outlined her case, explaining how she had recognized the pattern of symptoms and gathered evidence. This is remarkably thorough, Detective Nguyen said when Eleanor finished. Most poisoning victims never realize what's happening until it's too late, especially with a substance like atropine that can mimic age-related health issues. Most poisoning victims aren't pharmacists, Eleanor replied simply. We'll need to verify these test results through our own lab, Detective Nguyen's partner noted. And get a warrant to search your son's home for the source of the atropine. Eleanor nodded, her heart heavy despite her certainty. I understand. When will you make the arrest? We need to build the case first, Detective Nguyen explained. These recordings are compelling, but we need physical evidence linking her to the poison. Does your daughter-in-law have any medical background or connections? She volunteered at Westlake Memorial's charity events a few times, but no medical training that I know of. However, her first husband was a veterinarian. Atropine is used in veterinary medicine. The detectives exchanged glances. That gives her potential access. We'll investigate that angle. What happens now? Eleanor asked, suddenly feeling the emotional weight of what she had set in motion. We'll continue building the case, but you need to stay away from both your son and his wife. For your safety, we recommend you stay with a friend or at a hotel until we make an arrest. Eleanor shook her head firmly. I won't be driven from my home. Besides, if I disappear now, it might alert Vanessa that something's wrong. Then we'll assign an officer to monitor your house, Detective Nguyen insisted. And you absolutely cannot eat anything provided by your daughter-in-law. I've been protecting myself for months, Eleanor reminded her. I can continue for a few more days. That evening, alone in her house, Eleanor sat in Richard's old armchair, looking at their wedding photo. The young couple in the image seemed from another lifetime, hopeful, innocent, unaware of how their family story would unfold. I wish you were here, she whispered to Richard's smiling face. James is going to need us both for what's coming. Her phone rang, displaying James's number. Eleanor took a deep breath before answering. Mom? How are you feeling today? His concern sounded genuine, making Eleanor's heart ache. Much better, thank you. Good. Listen, Vanessa suggested we should come check on you tomorrow. She's worried about these episodes. Eleanor closed her eyes, recognizing the manipulation. At work. That's thoughtful, but I have plans tomorrow. Garden club meeting. Oh. James sounded disappointed. Well, Vanessa made some of her chicken soup for you. She says it's her grandmother's recipe, good for whatever might be ailing you. I could drop it off later tonight. The hairs on Eleanor's neck stood up. Actually, why don't you bring it on Wednesday? I'm heading to bed early tonight, and I have that doctor's appointment tomorrow. After finishing the call, Eleanor immediately contacted Detective Nguyen. They're trying to deliver food to me tonight. Supposedly soup for my health. Don't accept anything, the detective warned. We're executing the search warrant tomorrow morning. Until then, don't open your door to either of them. Eleanor hung up and walked through her house, checking the locks on all doors and windows. The security system Richard had insisted on installing years ago beeped reassuringly as she activated it. In her bedroom, she opened her journal and made another entry, documenting the phone call and her suspicions about the soup. The methodical act of recording details calmed her, returning her to the familiar territory of evidence and analysis rather than the emotional turmoil of betrayal. As she prepared for bed, Eleanor realized she felt no satisfaction in confirming her suspicions, only a profound sadness for her son and what he would soon have to face. The thought that her daughter-in-law had been systematically trying to kill her was still almost impossible to comprehend, despite the evidence she had gathered. Eleanor Wright, who had spent her career helping others understand medication and its effects, now found herself using that same knowledge to save her own life, and to bring to justice the woman who had almost ended it. The dawnlight was just breaking over the horizon when Eleanor's phone rang. Detective Nguyen's voice was crisp and professional. We executed the search warrant at 6 a.m. We found a vial of pharmaceutical-grade atropine in a locked jewelry box in their master bathroom. We're bringing Vanessa Mitchell in for questioning now. Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed, suddenly feeling every one of her 62 years. And James? He appears to be completely unaware. He's shocked, as you can imagine. 4 hours later, Eleanor sat across from her son in Detective Nguyen's office. James looked like he had aged a decade overnight, his face pale, eyes red-rimmed, hands shaking slightly as he clutched a paper cup of untouched coffee. I don't understand, he repeated. For what seemed like the 100th time. Why would she do this? How could I not have noticed? Eleanor reached across the table and took her son's hand. She was careful. She made sure I only got sick when you were around to witness it, building a pattern that looked like natural decline. If I hadn't been a pharmacist with training in recognizing poisoning symptoms, I might never have suspected. James looked up, his eyes filled with anguish. The life insurance policy. 6 months ago, Vanessa suggested we increase the coverage on both of us, and she insisted we add you to our family policy. Said it was the responsible thing to do. His voice broke. My wife tried to murder my mother for insurance money. In a separate interview room, Vanessa Mitchell sat in stony silence as Detective Gwynn laid out the evidence, the atropine found in her possession, the toxicology reports from Eleanor's food samples, the financial records showing increasing debt hidden from James, and the recently increased life insurance policy on Eleanor with a $750,000 payout. When confronted with the recordings of her conversations with James about Eleanor's decline and her careful monitoring of Eleanor eating the poisoned food, Vanessa's composure finally cracked. She has everything, Vanessa hissed, her beautiful face contorted with resentment. The big house, the investments, James's constant attention and devotion. Do you know what it's like living in the shadow of Saint Eleanor? The perfect mother who can do no wrong? So you decided to kill her? Detective Gwynn asked flatly. Vanessa's laugh was hollow. It would have looked natural. A heart condition exacerbated by age. No one would have questioned it, except she just wouldn't die. I kept increasing the dose, but somehow she developed a tolerance or something. The confession, captured on police video, would form the centerpiece of the prosecutor's case. Vanessa Mitchell was charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and possession of a controlled substance with intent to harm. In the aftermath, Eleanor opened her home to James, who couldn't bear to return to the house he had shared with Vanessa. Together, they began the painful process of understanding what had happened and why. I should have seen it, James said one evening as they sat in Eleanor's garden, watching the sunset. There were signs. We see what we expect to see, Eleanor replied gently. You expected a loving wife, not someone plotting murder. How did you know to start recording everything? Eleanor smiled sadly. I didn't want to believe it either. That's why I needed irrefutable evidence, not just for the police, but for myself. And for you. As weeks passed, the story made headlines. Across Seattle, Eleanor received letters from other elderly individuals who had experienced unexplained illnesses around family members, prompting Detective Gwynn to reopen several suspicious death cases. Eleanor's meticulous documentation became a template for a new police training program on investigating suspected poisonings, particularly those targeting older adults. Her medical knowledge, combined with her careful evidence gathering, had not only saved her life but would potentially save others. 6 months later, Eleanor sat in the courtroom as Vanessa Mitchell was sentenced to 20 years in prison for her crimes. James, sitting beside his mother, reached for her hand as the judge delivered the sentence. It's finally over, he whispered. But Eleanor knew some things were never truly over. The betrayal had left scars that would never completely heal. James would always question his judgment, his ability to trust. And Eleanor would always carry the knowledge that someone had looked her in the eye while trying to kill her. Yet she had survived, not just physically, but with her compassion intact. In the face of hatred, she had responded not with blind vengeance but with methodical justice. In her decades as a pharmacist, Eleanor had learned that proper measurement was everything, in medication and in response to life's challenges. As they left the courthouse, a reporter approached them. Mrs. Wright, how did you know to start recording everything? What made you suspicious? Eleanor paused, considering the question. In pharmacy, we're trained to recognize patterns. When something doesn't fit, you investigate. The symptoms I was experiencing told a story that my mind recognized before I was consciously willing to accept it. The reporter nodded, jotting notes. And now? How do you move forward from something like this? Eleanor glanced at James, seeing both the pain and resilience in her son's face. One day at a time, with truth as our foundation. When you've faced the worst and survived, everything else is manageable. That evening, Eleanor added a final entry to the journal that had helped save her life. Today marks an ending and a beginning, she wrote. The poison Vanessa introduced wasn't just in my food, it was in her words, her actions, her attempts to isolate me and create doubt. The antidote was evidence, truth, and the courage to trust my own perceptions. There is no satisfaction in her punishment, only relief that the danger has passed and hope that James will heal. She closed the journal and placed it in her desk drawer, a record of one of the darkest chapters of her life, but also testament to her strength and resilience. The retired pharmacist who had spent her career helping others understand medication had used that same knowledge to save herself, proving that expertise, combined with courage, could be the most powerful medicine of all. The days following Vanessa Mitchell's arrest unfolded like a surreal dream for Eleanor Wright. Her quiet suburban home became the center of a media storm, with reporters camping on her front lawn seeking exclusive interviews with the pharmacist who caught her poisoner. Eleanor declined them all, drawing her curtains against the intrusive camera lenses and focusing instead on helping her son rebuild his shattered life. James moved into Eleanor's guest room, bringing only essential clothing and his laptop. He couldn't bear to return to the house he'd shared with Vanessa, where every corner held memories now tainted by betrayal. At night, Eleanor sometimes heard him pacing the hallway, his footsteps a rhythmic reminder of trauma's restless energy. "You should eat something," Eleanor said one morning, finding James staring blankly at his untouched coffee. 2 weeks had passed since Vanessa's arrest, and his appearance had deteriorated, unshaven, hair uncombed, eyes perpetually shadowed from lack of sleep. "I'm not hungry," he replied automatically, the same response he'd given for days. Eleanor sat across from him, pushing a plate of toast within reach. "James, I know you're hurting, but you need to maintain your strength." He looked up, his eyes suddenly focused and pained. "How are you so calm?" "She tried to kill you, Mom. My wife, the woman I brought into our family, was poisoning you at our dinner table while I sat there completely oblivious." Eleanor reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "I processed most of my shock during the months I was gathering evidence. I had time to come to terms with it." While protecting yourself alone, James added, his voice breaking. "You couldn't even tell me. I couldn't risk Vanessa finding out I suspected her. And, honestly, James, would you have believed me? Without evidence?" His silence answered her question. Eleanor squeezed his hand. "This isn't your fault. Vanessa fooled everyone, not just you. I should have seen something," he insisted. "There must have been signs." "There probably were," Eleanor acknowledged. "But we rarely look for evil in the people we love. That's not a weakness, James, it's what makes love possible at all." Before James could respond, Eleanor's phone rang. Detective Nguyen's name flashed on the screen. "Mrs. Wright," the detective's voice was professional but gentle. "I wanted to update you personally. We've been investigating Vanessa's background more thoroughly, and there are some developments you and your son should know about." An hour later, Eleanor and James sat in Detective Nguyen's office, the blinds drawn against curious eyes in the precinct. "Vanessa Mitchell wasn't who she claimed to be," Detective Nguyen began, opening a thick file folder. "Her real name is Vanessa Caldwell. She's changed her identity several times over the past decade." James leaned forward, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "What are you saying?" "We believe your wife may be connected to at least 2 other suspicious deaths," the detective continued, her voice steady. "Her first husband, the veterinarian Dr. Thomas Blackwell, died of apparent heart failure at age 58. He had recently increased his life insurance with Vanessa as the sole beneficiary." Eleanor felt a chill run through her body. "The atropine, it could have come from his practice." Detective Nguyen nodded. "Exactly. We're exhuming his body for toxicology testing." "And the second death?" Eleanor asked, dreading the answer. "A wealthy widow named Margaret Simmons, who employed Vanessa, then going by the name Victoria Carter, as a live-in caregiver. Mrs. Simmons changed her will to include a substantial bequest to Victoria 3 months before dying of what was diagnosed as a stroke. Given what we now know about Vanessa's methods, we're reopening that investigation as well." James made a strangled sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "I was married to a serial killer? We don't have definitive proof yet," Detective Nguyen cautioned. "But the pattern is concerning enough that the prosecutor is building a broader case." Eleanor sat perfectly still, her pharmacist's mind cataloging the implications. Atropine in higher doses could indeed trigger cardiac events that might be mistaken for natural heart failure, especially in someone with pre-existing conditions. And certain anticholinergics could cause symptoms that mimicked stroke. "There's more," Detective Nguyen continued, turning a page in her file. "Financial records show Vanessa has been transferring funds to offshore accounts for years. We've frozen what we can find, but substantial amounts are missing." "Our savings," James whispered. "She said she was investing in art for her design clients." "I'm sorry, Mr. Wright," the detective said. "We're doing everything we can to recover those assets." As they left the police station, James stumbled slightly on the steps, his face ashen in the afternoon light. "I need to sit down," he said, collapsing onto a nearby bench. Eleanor sat beside him, waiting quietly while he processed the devastating new information. "I thought I knew her," he finally said, his voice hollow. "We plan to have children next year." The thought of Vanessa potentially becoming a mother sent a chill through Eleanor. "James, listen to me. You couldn't have known. Vanessa, or whatever her real name is clearly practiced at deception. She's spent years perfecting her methods. But why choose me? Why our family?" Eleanor had been asking herself the same question. "You're successful, stable, trustworthy. Your father left you well provided for. And you have a mother who would do anything for you. Including risking her life to gather evidence, James added bitterly. I still can't believe you faced this alone. Not entirely alone, Eleanor corrected. I had help from Marcus, my old colleague. And in a strange way, my medical training was like having company, giving me a framework to understand what was happening. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching people hurry past on the sidewalk, normal people leading normal lives, unaware of how quickly everything could change. What do we do now? James finally asked, sounding lost. Eleanor stood, offering her hand to help him up. We take it one day at a time. Starting with lunch. You need to eat. That evening, as James finally slept, aided by the mild sedative his doctor had prescribed, Eleanor sat in her garden watching the sunset. The roses Richard had planted years ago were beginning to bloom, their delicate fragrance carrying on the spring breeze. Her phone chimed with a text from Marcus, saw the news about the other victims. Are you okay? Eleanor typed back, processing. Having James here helps. How about dinner tomorrow? I could use a friend. Marcus's response came quickly, I'll bring takeout. 6 p.m., Eleanor smiled, feeling a small weight lift from her shoulders. Throughout her career, she had maintained a somewhat solitary life, dedicated to her work and family. Now, in the aftermath of trauma, she was rediscovering the importance of friendship and community. The next day brought another development. Eleanor was pruning her roses when a sleek black car pulled up to her curb. A woman in her 40s emerged, her tailored suit and precise movements suggesting legal or corporate background. Mrs. Eleanor Wright? The woman called from the sidewalk. Yes? Eleanor replied cautiously, still wary of strangers after recent events. My name is Alexandra Bennett. I'm an attorney representing the family of Margaret Simmons. She held up a business card. May I speak with you briefly? Eleanor invited her inside, calling James down from his makeshift home office in the guest room. They sat in the living room, James tense and Eleanor watchful. I understand from Detective Nguyen that you've been informed about Margaret Simmons' connection to your daughter-in-law, Alexandra began. Former daughter-in-law, James corrected flatly. Of course, Alexandra nodded. Mrs. Simmons' children have been suspicious about their mother's death for years, particularly the change to her will that benefited her caregiver, the woman you knew as Vanessa. When they contested it, they were painted as greedy and unsupportive. The courts upheld the will's validity. And now? Eleanor asked, suspecting where this was heading. Now we have new evidence suggesting foul play, Alexandra confirmed. The police are reopening the investigation, and the family is filing a civil suit. I'm here because your testimony about Vanessa's methods would be invaluable to our case. James looked stricken. You want my mother to relive her poisoning in another courtroom? James, Eleanor said gently. If my experience can help bring justice for another family, I need to consider it. Alexandra leaned forward. Mrs. Wright, your evidence is uniquely compelling. You recognized what was happening and documented it meticulously. Most victims of poisoning never know what hit them. Which is exactly what Vanessa was counting on, Eleanor observed. Precisely. Your medical background made you the one victim she couldn't silence. Alexandra placed a folder on the coffee table. The Simmons family asked me to give you this. It's information about their mother, who she was, what she meant to them. They thought it might help you understand why your testimony matters so much. After Alexandra left, Eleanor opened the folder. Inside were photos of Margaret Simmons, a vibrant woman in her 70s with bright eyes and an engaging smile. Letters from her children described her passion for gardening, her volunteer work with literacy programs, her legendary apple pie. The final page was a handwritten note. Mrs. Wright, you survived what our mother did not. Your voice can now speak for her. Thank you for your courage. The Simmons family. Eleanor traced her fingers over the words, feeling the weight of responsibility. She had never expected her personal trauma to become a source of hope for others seeking justice. That evening, Marcus arrived with Thai food and a bottle of Eleanor's favorite white wine. As they ate dinner on her patio, Eleanor shared the day's developments. Of course they want your testimony, Marcus said, refilling their glasses. You're the prosecutor's dream witness, medically knowledgeable, methodical, and credible. It's not just about testifying, Eleanor replied. The detective mentioned they're looking into other suspicious deaths with similar patterns. This could go on for years. Marcus studied her face. And how do you feel about that? Eleanor considered the question carefully. If my experience helps prevent someone else from becoming a victim, then some good has come from it. But I'm worried about James. He's devastated, Marcus. Finding out about these other cases has made everything worse. He needs time, Marcus suggested. And probably therapy. We both do, Eleanor acknowledged. I've been so focused on the practical aspects, gathering evidence, working with the police, that I haven't fully processed the emotional impact. That's your way of coping, Marcus observed. You retreat into the analytical when feelings become overwhelming. You always have. Eleanor smiled ruefully. Richard used to say the same thing. They were quiet for a moment, listening to the evening birds and the distant hum of traffic. I've been thinking, Marcus said finally. Maybe this experience, as terrible as it's been, is also an opportunity. How so? Your knowledge saved your life, Eleanor. How many other people, especially seniors, might be experiencing unexplained symptoms without recognizing what's happening? Eleanor had been wondering the same thing. Since Vanessa's arrest, she had researched cases of elder poisoning and found disturbing patterns: unexplained illnesses dismissed as age-related, sudden deaths attributed to natural causes without thorough investigation, financial exploitation following health decline. What are you suggesting? Marcus leaned forward. You're the perfect person to create awareness about this issue. Your background in pharmacology, your personal experience, your ability to explain complex medical concepts clearly, you could help others protect themselves. The idea took root in Eleanor's mind. Throughout her career, she had educated patients about medication safety. This would be an extension of that work, focused on a more sinister threat. I'll think about it, she promised. Later that night, unable to sleep, Eleanor opened her laptop and began researching organizations that focused on elder abuse prevention. The statistics were sobering: financial exploitation and physical abuse of older adults was significantly underreported, with many victims unable or unwilling to seek help. Eleanor created a document titled Recognizing the Signs, a guide to identifying poisoning in vulnerable adults. Drawing on her professional knowledge and personal experience, she outlined common symptoms, potential substances, and documentation strategies. As dawn broke, Eleanor realized she had worked through the night, producing 15 pages of clear, practical guidance. The writing had been therapeutic, transforming her trauma into something potentially helpful for others. At breakfast, she showed the document to James. You should publish this, he said after reading it. It could save lives. It's just a draft, Eleanor demurred. Mom, James met her eyes directly, more engaged than he had been in weeks. This is important. If you'd had a resource like this, you might have identified what was happening sooner. His words struck a chord. Eleanor had relied on her professional training to recognize the poisoning pattern, but most people wouldn't have that advantage. I'll contact some senior advocacy organizations, she decided. See if they're interested. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, Eleanor had scheduled meetings with 3 national organizations focused on elder protection. Her guide was circulated among medical professionals who specialized in geriatric care, with requests for her to expand it into educational materials for both healthcare workers and the general public. Detective Gwynn called a week later. Mrs. Wright, your guide has already made an impact. We had a case come in yesterday, an 83-year-old man whose granddaughter read your symptoms list and recognized what was happening to her grandfather. Preliminary testing shows antifreeze poisoning. His caregiver has been arrested. Already? Eleanor whispered, stunned by the immediate impact. Your experience is helping others before Vanessa's case even goes to trial, the detective confirmed. That's quite an achievement. The news energized Eleanor. For the first time since discovering Vanessa's betrayal, she felt a sense of purpose beyond surviving and supporting James. Her trauma was being transformed into a tool for protection and prevention. James noticed the change in his mother. You seem different, he observed one evening as they worked together in the kitchen. More like yourself. Eleanor handed him a bowl of salad to place on the table. I think I've found a way to make meaning from what happened. It doesn't erase the trauma, but it gives it purpose. The guide? And what's coming from it? I've been asked to help develop a training program for home health aides and a workshop for family members of vulnerable adults. James nodded. Slowly. That makes sense. You've always been a teacher at heart, even when you were dispensing medication, you were really educating people. I never thought of it that way, Eleanor admitted. But you're right. The most rewarding part of my work was helping people understand their medications, the why, not just the how. They ate dinner together, the conversation flowing more naturally than it had in weeks. James had begun therapy, and though his pain was still evident, Eleanor could see small improvements: more regular sleep, better appetite, occasional moments of his old humor emerging. I have something to tell you, James said as they cleared the dishes. I've decided to sell the house. I can't go back there, and I can't imagine anyone else living in it either. Are you sure? That house represented so much for you, your first major architectural project, your dream home. It's tainted now, James said simply. Every room holds memories of a life that was a lie. I need a fresh start. Eleanor understood completely. What will you do? I've been offered a position with an architectural firm in Portland. It's a good opportunity, working on sustainable housing projects. Eleanor felt her heart sink. Portland was over 170 miles away, not an impossible distance, but far enough to change their daily relationship. After weeks of having James under her roof, the thought of him moving away brought unexpected sadness. That sounds perfect for you, she said, keeping her voice steady. When would you start? Not for a couple of months. I still need to finalize the divorce, deal with the house, testify at Vanessa's trial. He hesitated. Unless you need me to stay longer. I know this has been hard on you too. Eleanor shook her head. James, I want what's best for your healing. If Portland represents a fresh start, then that's where you should be. Later, alone in her bedroom, Eleanor allowed herself to feel the complex emotions she had hidden from James. Relief that he was finding his way forward. Pride in his resilience. Sadness at the coming separation. And underneath it all, a gnawing worry about being alone again, not just physically alone, but alone with the knowledge of how vulnerable she had been. Her phone chimed with a text from Marcus. Committee meeting went well. They want to fund your education program. Dinner tomorrow to celebrate? Eleanor smiled, typing back, absolutely. My place this time. I'll cook. As she prepared for bed, Eleanor caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her appeared stronger than she had in months, not unchanged by trauma, but somehow more defined by it, like a photograph coming into sharper focus. The poisoning had been intended to diminish her, to erase her from her son's life and steal what she had built. Instead, it had revealed strengths she hadn't fully recognized, her analytical mind, her determination, her capacity to transform suffering into service. Eleanor Wright had spent decades dispensing medication to heal others. Now, in the aftermath of someone trying to use those same substances to harm her, she was finding a new way to help, turning the darkest chapter of her life into a source of light for others. The following day, Eleanor received a call from her doctor's office. Mrs. Wright, Dr. Patel would like you to come in to discuss your latest test results. Is something wrong? Eleanor asked, immediately alert. He prefers to discuss it in person. Can you come in tomorrow morning? The ambiguous response sent a chill through Eleanor. As a medical professional, she knew that good news was often delivered over the phone, while concerning results warranted in-person conversations. That night, she mentioned the appointment to James over dinner. I'll go with you, he said immediately. There's no need, Mom, he interrupted firmly. After everything that's happened, you're not facing potential health news alone. I'm going with you. Eleanor relented, touched by his insistence and secretly relieved not to be alone. The next morning, they sat together in Dr. Patel's office, waiting as he reviewed her file. Mrs. Wright, he began, your recent blood work shows some concerning changes from your baseline. Your liver function tests are elevated, and there are indications of kidney stress. Eleanor felt James tense beside her. Is this related to the poisoning? He asked. Dr. Patel nodded gravely. Most likely. Atropine itself is metabolized fairly quickly, but repeated exposure over months, as in your mother's case, can cause organ stress. We need to monitor this closely. Eleanor absorbed the information with the calm detachment she had cultivated during her pharmaceutical career. What's the treatment plan? Supportive care for now, Dr. Patel explained. Reduced medication. Load on your liver, increased hydration, regular monitoring. If the values continue to worsen, we may need to consider more aggressive interventions. As they left the medical center, James was visibly shaken. Even now, she's still hurting you, he said bitterly. It's not enough that she tried to kill you, now her poison is causing long-term damage. Eleanor took his arm as they walked to the car. Dr. Patel said the prognosis is good with proper monitoring. This is just another challenge to overcome. How can you be so calm about this? James demanded. Because panic doesn't help, Eleanor replied simply. And because I've already survived the worst part, not knowing what was happening to me. Now we have information, a treatment plan, and medical support. On the drive home, Eleanor gazed out the window, watching the familiar streets of her neighborhood pass by. She had lived here for over 30 years, raised her son in these surroundings. Built a life with Richard that had felt secure and predictable. Nothing was predictable anymore. Her health was compromised. Her son was moving away. Her sense of safety in her own home had been fundamentally altered. Yet alongside these losses, new possibilities were emerging, her advocacy work, renewed friendships, and a deeper understanding of her own resilience. You know, she said to James, your father always said that life reveals its lessons in the most unexpected ways. James glanced at her, then back at the road. What lesson could possibly come from Vanessa trying to kill you? Eleanor considered the question. That survival itself can become a form of expertise. That what hurts us can sometimes help others. That even in our 60s, we're still growing, still learning, still becoming. As they pulled into the driveway, Eleanor noticed a package on her front porch. Inside was a framed photograph of Margaret Simmons in her garden, along with a note from her daughter, "Your courage gives us hope. Thank you for helping us seek justice for our mother." Eleanor placed the photograph on her mantle, a reminder that her personal pain had created an unexpected connection to others who were suffering. What Vanessa had intended as isolation had instead become a bridge to a community of survivors and advocates. That evening, as James prepared dinner, a role he had increasingly assumed as Eleanor adjusted to her new health concerns, she sat at the kitchen table updating her guide with information about long-term effects of poisoning and resources for ongoing medical care. "I've been thinking," James said as he chopped vegetables. "Maybe Portland isn't the right move after all. Not with your health situation." Eleanor looked up from her laptop. "James, we've discussed this. Your life can't revolve around taking care of me. It's not just about you," he admitted. "The truth is, I'm scared to start over somewhere new. What if I make another catastrophic mistake in judgment?" "That's what therapy is for," Eleanor said gently. "And besides, good judgment comes from experience, which often comes from bad judgment. You're wiser now, not weaker." James considered. This as he continued preparing their meal. "Maybe we both need a fresh start. Have you thought about coming with me to Portland? Not to live together, but nearby? You could expand your advocacy work there." The suggestion caught Eleanor by surprise. She had been so focused on helping James move forward that she hadn't considered changing her own circumstances. "I'll think about it," she promised, realizing that perhaps she too needed to redefine her life beyond the boundaries of trauma. That night, Eleanor stood in her garden under a sky brilliant with stars. The same garden where she had meticulously documented her symptoms, where she had planted roses with Richard, where James had taken his first steps decades ago. Places held memories, both beautiful and painful. But people carried resilience within them, regardless of location. Eleanor had survived Vanessa's poisoning not because of where she lived, but because of who she was: observant, knowledgeable, persistent. Those same qualities would serve her wherever she went next, whether she stayed in this house or created a new home closer to James. The crucial lesson of the past months was that security came not from walls and locks but from wisdom and community. Eleanor Wright, retired pharmacist and unexpected survivor, looked up at the vast sky and felt something shift within her, a readiness to move beyond mere survival into whatever came next. The poison had not defined her. The betrayal had not diminished her. Instead, they had revealed a strength she would now use to protect others facing similar threats. Tomorrow would bring more challenges: medical appointments, legal proceedings, difficult decisions about the future. But tonight, under the stars her husband had once named for her, Eleanor felt the first real stirrings of peace, not despite what had happened, but because she had discovered her own capacity to transform trauma into purpose. The morning of Vanessa Mitchell's trial arrived with a crystalline autumn sky, the kind of perfect September day that seemed at odds with the darkness they were about to revisit in the courtroom. Eleanor stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her navy blue blazer, professional, dignified, the armor she had chosen for this battle. "Mom? Are you ready?" James called from downstairs. "Marcus is here to drive us." Eleanor took a deep breath, touching the small brooch pinned to her lapel, a silver caduceus that Richard had given her when she graduated from pharmacy school. Today, it felt like a talisman, connecting her to the knowledge that had saved her life. "Coming," she replied, giving herself one final appraising look before heading downstairs. Marcus Chin waited in the living room, his usual lab coat exchanged for a charcoal suit that made him look more like an executive than a toxicologist. His presence over the past months had been a steadying force for both Eleanor and James, bringing dinner when they were too exhausted to cook, accompanying them to meetings with prosecutors, offering the perspective of someone who understood both the science of poisoning and the emotional aftermath of betrayal. "You look ready for battle," he said, his eyes warm with encouragement. "I feel more like I'm heading to a funeral," Eleanor admitted. "The death of all our illusions about Vanessa." The courthouse was crowded, the case having attracted significant media attention. A poisoning case involving a serial black widow targeting affluent families had all the elements of a sensational story. Eleanor kept her head high as they navigated through reporters calling questions and photographers angling for reaction shots. Inside, the courtroom was cool and formal, the polished wood and muted colors creating an atmosphere of somber authority. Eleanor, James, and Marcus took seats in the front row behind the prosecution table, where District Attorney Caroline Winters was arranging documents with methodical precision. At precisely 9 a.m., a side door opened and Vanessa was led in by court officers. Despite 5 months in custody awaiting trial, she still carried herself with the poise that had once charmed Seattle's social circles. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style, her prison jumpsuit exchanged for a modest gray dress that seemed designed to project innocence and vulnerability. Eleanor felt James stiffen beside her as he saw his wife for the first time since her arrest. Instinctively, she reached for his hand, feeling the slight tremor in his fingers as he gripped hers. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Raymond Hoffman entered the courtroom. The proceedings began with opening statements, the prosecutor methodically outlining the evidence against Vanessa, the atropine found in her possession, the toxicology reports from Eleanor's food samples, the financial records showing the insurance policies and hidden debts, and most damning of all, Vanessa's own confession during police questioning. "This case is about more than attempted murder," D.A. Winters told the jury. "It's about predatory calculation. Vanessa Mitchell, or Vanessa Caldwell, or Victoria Carter, depending on which identity she was using, systematically targeted vulnerable individuals, earned their trust or that of their families, and then poisoned them for financial gain." The defense attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Rebecca Sloan, presented Vanessa as herself a victim of mental illness, of a traumatic childhood, of financial pressures that clouded her judgment. "My client admits to her actions," Sloan acknowledged. "But the state's portrayal of her as a calculating predator ignores the profound psychological issues that drove her behavior. This is not a monster before you, but a deeply troubled woman who needs treatment, not punishment." Eleanor watched Vanessa during this speech, noting how the younger woman kept her eyes downcast, occasionally dabbing at them with a tissue, the perfect picture of remorse. It was a performance Eleanor recognized from countless Sunday dinners, where Vanessa had expressed concern about her declining health, while secretly causing it. The first witness called was Detective Sarah Gwynn, who detailed the investigation and arrest. Her testimony included photographs of the atropine vial found in Vanessa's jewelry box and excerpts from the police interview where Vanessa had admitted to poisoning Eleanor. "In your experience, detective, was this a crime of opportunity or premeditation?" D.A. Winters asked. "Absolutely premeditated," Detective Gwynn answered without hesitation. "The suspect researched life insurance policies, systematically administered poison in increasing doses, and created a narrative about the victim's declining health to mask her actions. These are not impulsive behaviors." During cross-examination, the defense tried to establish that Vanessa had cooperated with police after her arrest, implying remorse. Detective Nguyen's response was measured but firm. The defendant provided information only after being confronted with overwhelming evidence. "This is tactical cooperation, not genuine remorse." Next came Marcus, testifying about the toxicology tests he had performed on Eleanor's food samples. His scientific expertise made him an impressive witness, explaining complex chemical analyses in terms the jury could understand. The concentration of atropine increased in each subsequent sample. He explained, gesturing to a chart displaying his findings. "This suggests intentional escalation, someone deliberately increasing the dosage over time." Throughout the morning, Eleanor observed the jury's reactions. Most seemed engaged and disturbed by the evidence, though one older man appeared skeptical, frequently frowning during prosecution testimony. Eleanor made a mental note to speak directly to him when her turn came. After a brief lunch recess, during which Eleanor barely touched her sandwich despite James and Marcus encouraging her to maintain her strength, court resumed with medical testimony from Dr. Patel about Eleanor's symptoms and ongoing health issues resulting from the poisoning. "Mrs. Wright continues to experience liver and kidney function abnormalities consistent with long-term toxic exposure," he explained. "While these may improve over time, some damage may be permanent." The defense tried to suggest that Eleanor's symptoms could have resulted from her existing heart condition or medication interactions, but Dr. Patel firmly rejected these alternatives. "I've been Mrs. Wright's physician for 15 years, he stated. The symptoms she experienced during the poisoning period were distinctly different from her controlled heart condition, and they improved when she stopped consuming food prepared by the defendant. Finally, at 2:30 p.m., Eleanor was called to the stand. As she walked forward and took her oath, she felt a strange calm settle over her. This moment, facing her would-be killer and telling her story, had occupied her thoughts for months. Now that it had arrived, she found herself focused and clear. "Mrs. Wright," D.A. Winters began, "please tell the court when you first suspected something was wrong with your health." Eleanor spoke clearly, describing the pattern of symptoms she had experienced after Sunday dinners at James and Vanessa's home. She explained how her pharmaceutical training had helped her recognize the specific effects of anticholinergic poisoning, and how she had begun documenting her symptoms and securing food samples for testing. "Why didn't you go to the police with your initial suspicions?" DA Winters asked. "I needed evidence," Eleanor replied. "An accusation of poisoning against a family member is extraordinary. Without proof, it would have been dismissed as the paranoia of an aging woman, which, ironically, was exactly the narrative Vanessa was creating about me." Throughout her testimony, Eleanor maintained eye contact with the jury, especially the skeptical older man. When she described the recordings she had made, including Vanessa's conversations with James about her declining health, she saw his expression shift from doubt to concern. "Mrs. Wright," DA Winters said, "could you tell the court what was going through your mind when you realized your daughter-in-law was poisoning you?" Eleanor paused, considering the question. "Initially, disbelief. I didn't want it to be true, for my sake, but especially for my son's. Then came a sort of clinical detachment. My training took over, and I began thinking like a pharmacist analyzing a case rather than a victim experiencing one." "And were you afraid?" "Yes," Eleanor admitted. "Not just of dying, though that was certainly a concern. I was afraid of what this would do to my son when he discovered the truth. I was afraid no one would believe me. Most of all, I was afraid that if I failed to gather enough evidence, Vanessa would simply try again with a different method." When it was the defense's turn for cross-examination, Rebecca Sloan approached with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Wright, you've described using your pharmaceutical expertise to identify what was happening to you. That's quite impressive," she began. "Would you say that your medical knowledge gave you an advantage that most potential victims wouldn't have?" Eleanor recognized the strategy immediately. The defense was trying to establish that Vanessa's plan would have succeeded with any other victim, supporting their argument that she needed psychiatric treatment rather than prison. "My training helped me identify the symptoms more quickly," Eleanor acknowledged. "But the human body knows when it's being poisoned, even if the mind can't name the substance. Anyone experiencing my symptoms would have eventually sought medical help." "But perhaps not before it was too late," Sloan suggested. "That was counting on," Eleanor replied evenly. "The gradual escalation was designed to mimic natural decline. It's a method that has likely succeeded many times without detection." Sloan shifted tactics. "Mrs. Wright, did my client ever express hostility toward you before these events? Any arguments or tensions in your relationship?" "No," Eleanor said. "That was part of the performance. Vanessa was unfailingly polite to my face while simultaneously poisoning my food and telling my son I was becoming senile." "Isn't it possible," Sloan pressed, "that someone suffering from mental illness might compartmentalize in this way? Genuinely care for you while another part of her mind was driven by irrational fears or compulsions?" Eleanor met the attorney's gaze directly. "I'm a pharmacist, not a psychiatrist. What I can tell you is that Vanessa's actions showed planning, escalation, and adaptation. When I didn't die as quickly as expected, she increased the dosage. That suggests rational calculation, not irrational compulsion." After Eleanor stepped down, she returned to her seat beside James, who squeezed her hand in silent support. Her testimony had lasted nearly 2 hours, leaving her emotionally drained but satisfied that she had communicated the truth effectively. The prosecution's final witness was a forensic accountant who detailed Vanessa's elaborate financial deceptions, the hidden debts, the offshore accounts, the insurance policies on Eleanor and her previous victims. The defendant's financial records show a pattern of living beyond her means, accumulating debt, then suddenly receiving large infusions of cash following the deaths of those close to her, he explained, displaying charts that tracked these patterns across a decade. When court adjourned for the day, Eleanor felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The most difficult part, her own testimony, was complete, but tomorrow would bring Vanessa's turn on the stand. That evening, James, Eleanor, and Marcus sat in Eleanor's living room, processing the day's events over takeout Thai food that none of them had much appetite for. "You were incredible, Mom," James said. "The jury was completely engaged when you were speaking." "Indeed," Marcus agreed. "You humanized the evidence we presented. The science matters, but your story brought it to life." Eleanor sighed, setting aside her barely touched noodles. "I just hope it's enough. Vanessa is persuasive, we all know that firsthand." "The evidence is overwhelming," Marcus reminded her. "Her own confession, the atropine in her possession, the financial records. Your testimony is the capstone, not the foundation." Later, alone in her bedroom, Eleanor replayed the day in her mind. Seeing Vanessa in person had been jarring, the familiar face now revealed as a mask for something calculating and deadly. Eleanor had expected to feel anger or fear, but what surprised her was the thread of pity running beneath those emotions. What kind of emptiness must exist within someone who could plan the slow death of a family member while smiling across the dinner table? The next morning brought Vanessa's testimony. She took the stand in a pale blue dress that emphasized her youth and vulnerability, her dark hair loose around her shoulders in a softer style than the previous day. "Ms. Mitchell," her attorney began, "can you tell the court about your childhood?" What followed was a narrative of trauma and abandonment, an alcoholic mother, a series of abusive foster homes, early experiences with exploitation that had shaped Vanessa's view of relationships as transactional rather than emotional. "I never learned how to love normally," Vanessa said, her voice breaking slightly. "I learned that people were either useful or dangerous. When I met James, I thought I could finally have a normal life, be a normal wife. But the old patterns were too ingrained." "And Eleanor?" Rebecca Sloan prompted. "What were your feelings toward her?" Vanessa glanced at Eleanor, then quickly looked away. "I was jealous of her relationship with James. He admired her so much, consulted her about everything. I felt like I was always competing with this perfect mother figure I could never measure up to." "So you decided to eliminate her?" Sloan asked gently. "It wasn't that simple," Vanessa insisted, tears now flowing freely. "There was a voice in my head that kept saying she was going to turn James against me, that she saw through me, that I needed to protect myself. I know now that voice was wrong, that I was ill, but at the time it seemed like the only option." Throughout this performance, and Eleanor was certain it was a performance, she maintained a neutral expression, though inside she felt a growing indignation. Vanessa was attempting to use mental illness as both explanation and excuse, potentially stigmatizing genuine psychiatric conditions in the process. During cross-examination, DA Winters dismantled Vanessa's narrative of impulsive, illness-driven behavior by methodically establishing the extensive planning involved in her crimes. "Ms. Mitchell, you ordered atropine using a former colleague's veterinary license, correct?" "Yes," Vanessa admitted. "And you researched the symptoms of anticholinergic poisoning to ensure you could mimic natural decline in an older adult?" "I don't remember specifically. Your internet search history, recovered from your laptop, shows multiple queries about undetectable poisons and mimicking natural death in elderly," DA Winters interrupted, displaying the evidence. "Does that refresh your memory?" By the time Vanessa left the stand, her carefully constructed image of mental fragility had been significantly undermined. The jury, initially sympathetic to her emotional testimony, now appeared troubled by the evidence of calculation and premeditation. Closing arguments were scheduled for the following morning. That night, Eleanor found sleep elusive, her mind replaying Vanessa's testimony and anticipating the jury's decision. Around midnight, she went downstairs to make tea, surprised to find James already in the kitchen, staring out the window into the darkness. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly. He turned, his expression haunted in the dim light. "I keep thinking about her testimony. Some of it was manipulation, obviously, but some felt true. The broken childhood, the inability to form normal attachments. I lived with her for 5 years, Mom. How did I not see any of this?" Eleanor joined him at the window, both of them looking out at the garden now silvered by moonlight. "Because she didn't want you to see it. And because you're fundamentally decent, James. You expect decency from others. Is that naivety or stupidity?" he asked bitterly. "It's hope," Eleanor replied. "And the world needs more of that, not less." They stood in silence for a moment, mother and son united in their struggle to make sense of betrayal. "Whatever the verdict," Eleanor said finally, "we've already won the most important battle. We're here, we're alive, we're moving forward." Vanessa failed in her ultimate goal. James nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about Portland. The firm called yesterday, they're holding the position for me, but they need an answer by next week." "You should take it," Eleanor said, surprising herself with how certain she felt. "It's a fresh start, James. A chance to create something new." "What about you? Your health, your ongoing treatments?" Eleanor had been considering this question for weeks. "Portland has excellent medical facilities. And my advocacy work can continue from anywhere. In fact, a new environment might be good for both of us." James looked at her with surprise. "Are you saying you'd consider moving too?" "I'm saying I'm open to possibilities," Eleanor replied. "This experience has taught me that security isn't about staying in one place, it's about being adaptable, resourceful. The skills that helped me survive Vanessa's poisoning will serve me wherever I go." The next morning, closing arguments crystallized the opposing narratives of the trial. The prosecution portrayed Vanessa as a calculating predator who had perfected her methods over multiple victims. The defense continued to emphasize mental illness and childhood trauma as mitigating factors, arguing for commitment to a psychiatric facility rather than prison. As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, Eleanor felt a strange sense of completion. Regardless of the verdict, she had done everything possible to ensure justice, not just for herself, but for Margaret Simmons and Thomas Blackwell, whose deaths had been re-examined in light of Vanessa's methods. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours, surprisingly quick for such a complex case. When they returned, the forewoman, a middle-aged teacher with kind eyes and a determined expression, delivered their decision, guilty on all counts, including attempted murder, financial fraud, and identity theft. Judge Hoffman scheduled sentencing for the following week, thanking the jury for their service before adjourning court. As Vanessa was led away, she turned toward Eleanor and James, her expression unreadable, before disappearing through the side door back to custody. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. D.A. Winters gave a brief press conference, praising Eleanor's courage and highlighting the importance of taking elder abuse seriously. When reporters approached Eleanor, she surprised herself by agreeing to speak briefly. Today's verdict isn't about vengeance, she told the assembled cameras. It's about protection, ensuring that others won't become victims of the same scheme. If my experience helps even one person recognize the warning signs of poisoning or financial exploitation, then some good has come from this ordeal. A reporter called out, "Mrs. Wright, how did you find the strength to gather evidence while being poisoned?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I had advantages many victims don't: medical training, support of friends, financial security. That's why I've established the Wright Prevention Initiative, a non-profit organization that will provide education and resources to help vulnerable adults protect themselves from exploitation." This announcement, made public for the first time, brought a fresh wave of questions, but Marcus and James gently guided Eleanor through the crowd to Marcus's waiting car. "You didn't tell me about the non-profit," James said as they drove away from the courthouse. "I was waiting for the right moment," Eleanor admitted. "It's been in development for weeks. Marcus has been helping me with the structure and funding applications." Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Your mother is quite the force of nature once she sets her mind to something." The initiative already has partnership commitments from 3 major elder advocacy organizations. The goal is to develop education programs for medical professionals, caregivers, and family members, Eleanor explained. Teaching people to recognize the warning signs of poisoning and financial exploitation. James shook his head in amazement. "Most people would just try to put this experience behind them. You're building something new from it." "That's how healing works," Eleanor said simply. "You transform pain into purpose." 1 week later, they returned to court for Vanessa's sentencing. Judge Hoffman delivered a 20-year prison term, citing the calculated nature of the crimes and the ongoing investigations into previous suspicious deaths connected to Vanessa's earlier identities. As they left the courthouse for the final time, Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The legal process was complete. Justice had been served. Now they could focus fully on rebuilding. That evening, Eleanor and James sat on her patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. Marcus would be arriving soon with dinner to celebrate the conclusion of the trial, but for now, they enjoyed a moment of quiet reflection. "I accepted the Portland position today," James said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I start in 3 weeks. Eleanor smiled, genuinely happy for him. "That's wonderful news. Have you started looking for apartments?" "Actually, I've been researching houses with in-law suites or adjacent cottages," he replied, watching her carefully. "Places that would give us both independence and proximity." The implication was clear. "James, you don't need to structure your new life around me. It's not obligation, Mom. It's preference. This experience has shown me the value of family, real family, based on love and support, not manipulation. I want you in my daily life, not just on holidays and video calls." Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She had been so focused on appearing strong for James that she had suppressed her own vulnerability. "I'd like that too," she admitted. "But only if it truly makes sense for both of us." "It does," James assured her. "Portland has excellent medical facilities for your ongoing treatment, a strong senior advocacy community for your nonprofit work, and the architecture firm is excited about my ideas for designing senior-friendly housing innovations. It's synergy, not sacrifice." Eleanor looked out at her garden, the roses Richard had planted now in their autumn dormancy, preparing for winter's rest before spring renewal. This house had been her home for decades, filled with memories of Richard, of James growing up, of a life she had thought would continue predictably into her final years. But life had taken an unexpected turn, revealing both terrible darkness and surprising light. The poisoning that was meant to end her life had instead transformed it, opening new possibilities she would never have considered otherwise. Portland, she said, testing the word. A new chapter. James reached for her hand. For both of us. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Eleanor Wright, pharmacist, survivor, advocate, mother, allowed herself to imagine the future taking shape before her. Not a diminished existence as Vanessa had intended, but an expanded one, defined not by what had been taken from her, but by what she had discovered within herself: resilience, purpose, and the courage to begin again. The doorbell rang, announcing Marcus's arrival with dinner and, Eleanor suspected, a bottle of champagne to celebrate. As James went to answer it, Eleanor remained on the patio for a moment longer, savoring the twilight and the promise it held. "Thank you, Richard," she whispered to the evening sky, somehow certain that her late husband would approve of her new direction. "I think this next chapter might be one of the most important yet." With that thought, Eleanor rose and went inside to join the people who had helped her transform trauma into triumph, poison into purpose, and an ending into a new beginning. The Portland sky greeted Eleanor with a gentle spring rain as she stood at the window of her new home, a charming garden cottage adjacent to James's craftsman-style house in the Selwood neighborhood. 6 months had passed since Vanessa's sentencing, 6 months of rebuilding and reimagining what life could be after surviving someone's attempt to end it. "Knock, knock," called a cheerful voice from the open doorway. "I brought housewarming muffins." Eleanor turned to see Lisa Donovan, her next-door neighbor and newest friend, holding a basket of what smelled like blueberry muffins still warm from the oven. "You're spoiling me," Eleanor laughed, welcoming Lisa into her sunlit kitchen. "That's the third baked offering this week. Portland welcomes newcomers through their stomachs," Lisa declared, setting down the basket. At 68, the retired literature professor had appointed herself Eleanor's unofficial guide to the city, introducing her to everything from farmers' markets to literary events. "How's the unpacking going?" Lisa asked, glancing around at the half-empty boxes still scattered through the cottage. "Slowly," Eleanor admitted. "I keep getting distracted by the view." She gestured toward the window, where raindrops traced glistening paths down the glass, beyond which lay her small but promising garden plot. "Gardening is meditation in Portland," Lisa said. "Required for maintaining sanity during our 9 months of rain." Eleanor smiled, pouring them both coffee from the carafe James had delivered earlier. Their new living arrangement, separate homes with a shared courtyard between, had proven ideal, offering both independence and connection. James had his own space to continue healing from Vanessa's betrayal, while Eleanor had privacy without isolation. "I'm supposed to remind you about dinner tonight," Lisa said, accepting the coffee. "James mentioned you've been working straight through meals again." "The nonprofit launch is 3 weeks away," Eleanor explained. "There's still so much to finalize." Since arriving in Portland, Eleanor had thrown herself into developing the Right Prevention Initiative with an energy that sometimes surprised even her. What had begun as a concept born from trauma had evolved into a comprehensive program for protecting vulnerable adults from exploitation. "Which is precisely why you need a proper dinner and an evening off," Lisa insisted. "James is grilling salmon, I'm bringing wine, and Marcus arrives from Seattle at 6. The mention of Marcus brought a smile to Eleanor's face. Since the trial, his regular visits had become a bright spot in her calendar. Their friendship had deepened into something neither of them had named yet, but which held the comfortable familiarity of two people who had witnessed each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. "I'll be there," Eleanor promised. "And I'll even stop working by 5. After Lisa left, Eleanor returned to the task she'd been avoiding all morning, sorting through the final box of items from her Seattle home. Unlike the practical kitchen supplies and clothes she'd unpacked immediately, this box contained memories, photo albums, Richard's old journals, treasured cards and letters from decades of life. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, lay the silver caduceus brooch she had worn during Vanessa's trial. Eleanor held it in her palm, feeling its weight and remembering the strength it had given her in the courtroom. She had not worn it since the sentencing, but today felt right for its return. Pinning it to her sweater, Eleanor made a decision. The past, both its joys and traumas, belonged with her in this new chapter. Not as baggage to weigh her down, but as hard-earned wisdom to light her path forward. With renewed purpose, Eleanor turned to her laptop, where the draft presentation for the Right Prevention Initiative's launch event awaited her final edits. The nonprofit had already secured funding for its first year of operations, with Eleanor as its executive director and a small but dedicated staff of medical professionals and elder advocates. Their inaugural program, Recognition and Response, Identifying Poisoning in Vulnerable Adults, would train healthcare workers, home health aides, and family caregivers to spot the subtle signs that Eleanor had recognized through her pharmaceutical expertise. As she refined the presentation, Eleanor's phone chimed with a text from Dr. Patel in Seattle. Latest test results show continued improvement in liver function. Whatever you're doing in Portland, keep it up. Eleanor smiled at the good news. Her health had been steadily improving since the move, the lingering effects of Vanessa's poisoning gradually resolving with time and treatment. Dr. Patel had connected her with an excellent hepatologist in Portland who was monitoring her recovery. But the Seattle physician still reviewed her results and offered encouragement from afar. Another text arrived, this one from Detective Nguyen. Thought you should know, forensic evidence confirmed atropine in Blackwell exhumation. Vanessa will face additional charges. Your case helped make this happen. Eleanor sat back, absorbing this information. Thomas Blackwell, Vanessa's first husband, would finally receive justice. The veterinarian's death 5 years earlier had been attributed to heart failure, but Eleanor's case had prompted authorities to re-examine it with new suspicion. Thank you for letting me know, she replied to Detective Nguyen. Please share my contact information with his family if they might find it helpful to talk. This had become an unexpected part of Eleanor's new purpose, connecting with other victims and their families, sharing her experience to help them process their own trauma and grief. 3 months earlier, she had met with Margaret Simmons' children, finding healing in their shared understanding of Vanessa's manipulation and the system failures that had allowed her to operate undetected for years. At noon, Eleanor forced herself to step away from work. Her doctors had emphasized the importance of regular meals and moderate exercise in her recovery regimen. She prepared a simple lunch of soup and salad, then donned a rain jacket for her daily walk through the neighborhood. Selwood had proven to be the perfect landing place for this new phase of life, a community-oriented neighborhood with tree-lined streets, local businesses, and the Willamette River just blocks away. Eleanor had quickly established a favorite route that took her past century-old homes, through a small park, and along the riverfront. As she walked, Eleanor reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. At 62, she had anticipated a quiet retirement focused on gardening and occasional pharmaceutical consulting. Instead, she found herself launching a nonprofit, developing educational programs, and discovering new purpose in helping protect others from the trauma she had experienced. The rain softened to a misty drizzle as Eleanor reached the river. She paused at a viewing point, watching the water flow steadily northward. There was something reassuring about rivers, their constant movement, their ability to carve new paths while maintaining their essential nature. Mrs. Wright? Eleanor Wright? Eleanor turned to find a woman in her 50s approaching, her expression tentative but determined. Yes, I'm Eleanor, she confirmed, studying the stranger's face. I'm Patricia Blackwell, the woman said. Thomas Blackwell's sister. Detective Nguyen gave me your contact information. I hope you don't mind me tracking you down like this. I saw you walking from my car and I needed to thank you in person. Eleanor felt a jolt of recognition. This was the family of Vanessa's first victim reaching out across the years of deception. Please, call me Eleanor, she said, extending her hand. Would you like to walk with me? Or perhaps find somewhere dry to talk? 20 minutes later, they sat in a nearby cafe, steam rising from mugs of tea as Patricia shared her 5-year journey of suspicion and frustration following her brother's death. I knew something wasn't right, she explained, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug. Thomas was only 58, in good health except for mild hypertension that was well controlled. The sudden heart failure never made sense, but Vanessa, we knew her as Vanessa Caldwell then, had all the medical details ready for the coroner. Being a veterinarian's wife, she knew just enough to sound credible. Eleanor nodded, recognizing the pattern. And she presented as the grieving widow. Perfectly, Patricia confirmed bitterly. Devastated but stoic, handling everything with such efficiency. Within 2 months, she'd collected the life insurance and moved away. When I tried to raise concerns with the police, they saw a sister. Unable to accept her brother's natural death. Until your case broke everything open, Patricia continued. When Detective Nguyen contacted me about the exhumation, it was like finally being heard after screaming into the void for years. Eleanor understood completely. Validation can be as important as justice sometimes. Knowing you weren't wrong, weren't imagining things. Exactly. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. But that's not why I wanted to meet you. I've been following your work with the Right Prevention Initiative. Your website, the educational materials you're developing, they're exactly what might have saved Thomas. Eleanor felt a surge of emotion. This was the purpose she had discovered in her trauma, creating practical tools to prevent others from experiencing similar pain. We're launching our first training program next month, she told Patricia. Healthcare workers are our initial focus, but we're developing materials for family members too. People like you, who notice something wrong but don't have the specific knowledge to identify poisoning. Patricia leaned forward. I want to help. I have a background in educational publishing. I could assist with developing those materials, making them accessible to non-medical readers. By the time they parted an hour later, Patricia Blackwell had become the newest volunteer for the Wright Prevention Initiative, and Eleanor had gained another connection in her expanding community of survivors and advocates. Walking home in the late afternoon sunshine that had broken through the clouds, Eleanor felt energized rather than drained by the unexpected encounter. Each person who shared their story reinforced the importance of the work she was doing, transforming personal trauma into collective protection. Back at her cottage, Eleanor had just enough time to shower and change before dinner. She chose a teal blouse that brought out the color in her eyes and complemented the silver caduceus brooch she had decided to keep wearing, no longer as armor, but as a symbol of the knowledge that had saved her life and could now save others. Crossing the shared courtyard to James's house, Eleanor paused to appreciate the spring flowers they had planted together when she first arrived in Portland. The daffodils and tulips represented their fresh start, bright spots of color and life emerging from the dark soil of winter. "There she is," James called from the back deck, where he was tending the grill. At 37, her son looked healthier than he had in years, the Portland air and his new career focus bringing color to his cheeks and light back to his eyes. The architectural firm had given him responsibility for their new adaptive living division, designing homes that could evolve with residents' changing needs throughout aging. His personal experience with Eleanor's situation had sparked innovative approaches that were already garnering attention in the industry. "Something smells amazing," Eleanor said, climbing the steps to join him. "Cedar plank salmon with a maple glaze," James replied. "Lisa's bringing a quinoa salad, and Marcus texted that he's bringing something called Marionberry cobbler that apparently is required eating in Oregon." As if summoned by her name, Lisa appeared at the gate, balancing a large bowl and a bottle of wine. "The rain held off," she called cheerfully. "A good omen for our dinner party." The three chatted easily as James finished grilling and Eleanor set the table on the covered portion of the deck. This had become their Friday ritual, a shared meal that anchored the week and strengthened their new community bonds. At precisely 6 o'clock, the gate chimed again, and Eleanor felt her heart lift at the sight of Marcus making his way up the garden path. At 65, the retired toxicologist carried himself with the straight-backed posture of someone who had spent decades in laboratories, but his smile had the warmth of a man who found joy outside of science as well. "Seattle traffic was surprisingly cooperative," he announced, presenting the promised cobbler and a bouquet of spring flowers that he handed to Eleanor with a gentle touch. "These reminded me of the ones in your new garden." "They're perfect," Eleanor replied, inhaling their fragrance. "Let me put them in water before we eat." In the kitchen, arranging the flowers in a crystal vase that had been one of the few decorative items she'd brought from Seattle, Eleanor found herself smiling. There was something comforting about Marcus's consistent thoughtfulness, his quiet attention to details that might please her. Their friendship had evolved naturally in the aftermath of trauma, built on shared professional respect and mutual support during Vanessa's trial. The transition to something more personal had been gradual: additional phone calls, longer visits, conversations that ranged far beyond the case that had brought them together. Eleanor returned to the deck with the flowers displayed in their vase, setting them at the center of the table as everyone took their seats. "A toast," James proposed, raising his wine glass. "To new beginnings and chosen family." "And to strength that comes from surviving," Lisa added. "To purpose found in unexpected places," Marcus contributed, his eyes meeting Eleanor's over the rim of his glass. "To all of that," Eleanor agreed, "and to the simple joy of gathering together on a spring evening." The conversation flowed easily. Through dinner, touching on James's latest architectural project, Lisa's community garden initiatives, Marcus's part-time consulting work, and Eleanor's upcoming nonprofit launch. "The venue is confirmed," Eleanor reported, serving the Marionberry cobbler. "The Portland Medical Association is hosting, and we've already reached our registration capacity. Healthcare providers are genuinely eager for this training." "No surprise there," Marcus commented. "Your program fills a critical gap. Most medical professionals receive minimal training in recognizing deliberate poisoning, especially when it's disguised as age-related decline." "That's what makes Eleanor's approach so valuable," Lisa added. "She's combining pharmaceutical expertise with real-world experience and packaging it in accessible training modules." James watched his mother with evident pride. "When I think about where we were a year ago compared to now, it's remarkable." Eleanor understood the unspoken sentiment. A year ago, she had been fighting for her life while gathering evidence against Vanessa. James had been living with a woman who was systematically poisoning his mother. Their world had been on the verge of shattering. "Remarkable indeed," she agreed quietly. "Though not without its challenges." After dinner, as Lisa helped James Clear the dishes and package leftovers. Marcus invited Eleanor for a walk in the evening air. They strolled through the neighborhood as twilight settled around them, streetlights coming on to cast pools of golden light on the sidewalks. I have something to discuss with you, Marcus said after they had walked in comfortable silence for several minutes. A proposition of sorts. Eleanor glanced at him curiously. That sounds intriguing. Seattle University has approached me about developing a forensic toxicology certificate program, he explained. They're particularly interested in a component focused on recognizing poisoning in clinical settings. That's wonderful, Marcus. You'd be an excellent instructor for such a program. I suggested we develop it as a joint venture with the Wright Prevention Initiative, he continued. Combining academic certification with your practical training modules. It would extend the reach of both our efforts. Eleanor considered the proposal, immediately seeing the potential. A partnership. Makes perfect sense. The university connection would give our initiative additional credibility in academic circles. They discussed the logistics as they walked, their professional excitement gradually giving way to a more personal conversation. There's one complication, Marcus admitted as they turned back toward home. The program development would require regular trips between Seattle and Portland, at least initially. That seems manageable, Eleanor observed. The train service between the cities is excellent. Marcus slowed his pace. I've been considering a more permanent solution, actually. Property values in Portland are quite reasonable compared to Seattle. And my consulting work can be done from anywhere. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken slightly as she grasped his meaning. Are you suggesting a relocation? I'm suggesting exploration of possibilities, he replied carefully. My lease in Seattle ends in 3 months. It seems a natural time to consider options. They had reached a small neighborhood park, where Marcus guided them to a bench overlooking a fountain illuminated by subtle lighting. Sitting together, they watched the water cascade in rhythmic patterns. Eleanor, Marcus began, his voice gentle but direct, I found myself increasingly reluctant to leave Portland after each visit. Initially, I attributed it to professional interest in your nonprofit work, but I've come to recognize there's more to it than that. Eleanor smiled in the dim light. I've noticed my mood improves significantly when your visits approach and dips noticeably when you leave. A correlation worth investigating further, he suggested, scientific terminology softening what was essentially a declaration of feeling. I would welcome your more permanent presence in Portland, Eleanor acknowledged, both professionally and personally. But I want to be certain you're making this decision for yourself, not out of concern for me or obligation to the initiative. Marcus turned slightly to face her more directly. After 40 years in toxicology, I've developed considerable skill in distinguishing between causation and correlation. My interest in relocating correlates with your presence in Portland, but it's caused by my desire for a new chapter that includes more than occasional visits with someone I've come to care for deeply. Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her. That had nothing to do with the mild spring evening. At 62, she had not expected to find this kind of connection again, this blend of intellectual companionship, shared purpose, and gentle affection. Then I think you should explore Portland real estate options, she said, reaching for his hand. Preferably in the Selwood neighborhood. Their fingers intertwined as they sat in comfortable silence, the fountain's gentle music providing a soundtrack to this unexpected new beginning. When they finally returned to James's house, they found him and Lisa playing Scrabble on the deck, a bottle of port and 2 glasses between them. We were about to send out a search party, James teased, looking up from the game board. But you two look suspiciously happy, so I'm guessing the walk was a success. Marcus has some news, Eleanor prompted, unable to keep a smile from her face. I'm considering relocating to Portland, Marcus announced. The Seattle University Toxicology program would partner with Eleanor's initiative, and I'd be looking for a place in this neighborhood. Lisa clapped her hands in delight. The house 3 doors down from me just listed yesterday. It's a beautiful craftsman with original woodwork and a garden that would benefit from your scientific attention. James caught Eleanor's eye, a question in his expression. She nodded slightly, confirming what he suspected, that Marcus's move represented more than just a professional collaboration. This calls for a celebration, James declared, pouring port for Marcus and Eleanor. To new neighbors and new partnerships of all kinds. The evening concluded with plans for Lisa to show Marcus the available house the next morning, followed by a meeting at Eleanor's cottage to discuss the university partnership proposal. Later, as Marcus prepared to leave for his hotel, he and Eleanor stood in the gentle glow of the porch light. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly. It's a significant change. Eleanor, he replied, his voice steady, you taught me something profound through your experience with Vanessa. You showed me that crisis reveals not just who we are, but who we can become. You transformed a near tragedy into a mission that will help countless others. He paused, choosing his words carefully. At 65, I've lived a satisfying but somewhat solitary life. Working with you these past months has shown me possibilities I hadn't considered, for professional impact. Yes, but also for personal connection. I'm not just moving to Portland, I'm moving toward a future that holds more meaning and joy than I had imagined possible at this stage of life. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected emotion welling up at his words. When Vanessa was poisoning me, my greatest fear wasn't dying, it was leaving without having completed my purpose. I couldn't articulate what that purpose was, but I felt it wasn't finished. And now? Marcus asked softly. Now I understand that purpose isn't a destination but a journey. The poisoning wasn't an endpoint but a turning point that revealed new paths I couldn't have imagined. She gestured toward her cottage, James's house, the neighborhood that had welcomed her. This new life, the initiative, the community we're building, the possibility of you becoming part of it, feels like purpose revealing itself one step at a time. Marcus nodded, understanding completely. From poison to purpose. Exactly. Eleanor agreed. Not despite what happened, but because of how we chose to respond to it. As Marcus departed with plans to return in the morning, Eleanor crossed the courtyard to her cottage, feeling a sense of rightness settle around her like a comfortable shawl. The tragedy that had nearly ended her life had instead expanded it. In ways she could never have predicted. Inside, she prepared for bed with the quiet contentment of someone who has discovered that life's most difficult chapters can become preludes to its most meaningful ones. On her nightstand stood a framed photograph of Richard, her late husband's kind eyes seeming to approve of the new path she had found. "You always said I was stronger than I knew," she whispered to his image. "I think you were right." Beneath the photograph lay the journal she had used to document her poisoning symptoms, now repurposed as a place to record her thoughts on this new chapter. Opening it, Eleanor began to write. Today marks 6 months since leaving Seattle. And the memories of betrayal it held. What began as escape has become emergence. The poison that was meant to diminish me has instead revealed strengths I never knew I possessed. The trauma that could have defined me has become merely one chapter in a continuing story. She paused, considering all that had transpired and all that lay ahead, the nonprofit launch, the university partnership, Marcus's potential move, James's flourishing career, and the expanding circle of friends and allies who had become her chosen family. "I once told James that security isn't about staying in one place, it's about being adaptable and resourceful. Now I understand that healing follows the same principle. It isn't about returning to who we were before trauma, it's about discovering who we can become because of how we navigated it." Eleanor closed the journal and turned off her lamp, listening to the gentle spring rain that had resumed its patter on the roof. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, the ongoing work of building a life that honored both where she had been and where she was going. The woman who had once meticulously documented poison in her system now documented purpose in her days. The pharmacist who had used her knowledge to save her own life now used it to protect others. The mother who had feared leaving her son vulnerable to manipulation now watched him thrive in his own newly constructed life. Eleanor Wright drifted toward sleep with the peaceful certainty that the story Vanessa had tried to end had instead found its most meaningful chapters. From poison had come purpose. From betrayal had come belonging. From an attempted ending had come a beginning more authentic and fulfilling than she could have imagined. And in that transformation lay a truth more powerful than any toxin, that the human spirit, when tested by darkness, can emerge not merely intact but illuminated, casting light for others to find their way forward from their own darkest moments. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.